Good morning, everybody. This is Tuesday morning's edition of Ask the Master Auto Technician, and every day I try to do something that you can at least benefit from. About when it comes to cars, air conditioning, it's hot outside. Okay, we've talked about that before. When air conditioning doesn't work, you think about getting it fixed. Then when it doesn't work, is when it does work, you say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It works fine. Well, it's true. It does work fine when there's nothing wrong with it, but there's something you can do to keep it working fine. One of the things most often overlooked piece of equipment that's a maintenance issue that can affect compressors, can affect the way your car cools inside, and affects you, the driver, is something called a cabin air filter. Cabin air filters have been around for, well, over 20 years on cars, but not all cars had them. I would venture to say it's only been in the last 10 years that most cars have cabin filters. There's a few exceptions to that rule still. And cabin filters do expire, and they don't last forever. This is what a new cabin filter looks like. It's nice and bright and white. That's a common, thank you, Anna Marie, for bringing that to me. That's what they're supposed to be able, if you take a flashlight, which I can do right here, you can take a flashlight, shine behind it, and you can see the light shining, the flashlight shining between it. That's how you know if you got a cabin air filter is dirty or clean. And they're only supposed to last about a year. So if it's been in there a year, change it. It's worth the money. This is one we found that was in a car that never ever been changed. I think you can see a little light if you go through it, just barely. The thing is, it was so bad, so clogged, no air would pass through it. That caused the actual the compressor to actually be damaged because this cabin filter won't allow air to go through it. So it's not allowing the molecules of refrigerant liquid to boil off before it returns to the compressor. That's what it's supposed to do. Remember, the evaporator is a flooded liquid, not a gas. It's a flooded cold liquid. It's only a gas as it starts to leave the evaporator, as it leaves the evaporator. Not while it's at the beginning, not in the middle, but towards the very end of the evaporator. In most cases, that's where it starts to turn back into a gas. And it does that because air is passing through it and it's changing. It's absorbing the heat and boiling. I know it sounds hard to believe, but it's boiling. It may be boiling at 42 degrees out, but it's boiling. And that's what's happening. And so if it can't turn back into a gas, then your compressor is going to slug a liquid. Well, you and I both know what happens when you can't compress a liquid. You can compress a gas, but not a liquid. Well, if that liquid finds its way all the way back to the compressor, boom, that compressor hits it, then you've got a problem with your compressor. You bend the reed valve, the car is not able to compress, and then next thing you know, you end up having to change a compressor, condenser, and all the things that go with it. And instead of it being just a $30 bill, now you got yourself a $300 to $3,000 bill by having to change compressors, condensers, evaporator, all these things. If you have a Honda, boy, that's a Honda Element. If the compressor ever goes out on that, on some of the Honda Elements, they wanted us to change everything. I mean, everything. Hoses, condenser, evaporator, expansion valve, everything because of contamination. You just can't get it clean. That's the problem. So I'm just trying to say, filters and fluids are a heck of a lot cheaper than buying metal parts, but cabin air filters are something that should be changed once a year. I know, you say, what? I didn't know I even had one. Well, we had a car come in yesterday, 2007 model. Had the original cabin air filter in it because they didn't know they had one. It was a Mercedes, and there's no Mercedes dealerships in this town. And there's a few shops that work on them here in town, but a lot of people don't know that Mercedes have been putting them on for years. Even my wife's Crossfire. And I got a fuss at, I shouldn't fuss, but years ago when we first bought it, the tech that worked for us worked at Chrysler, and he said, yeah, I work on Chryslers all the time. And I said, well, does this have a cabin air filter? No, Chryslers don't come with a cabin air filter in 2004. He was wrong. It had a cabin air filter. Last year, I think it was last year, my wife was complaining about it not blowing very strong at her. We checked it out. The filter looked a lot like this.
Well, what I had in there was noise.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That was my original complaint. Now, it definitely blew better when it was changed, but it was the noise. I said it sounded like there's something coming apart in my dash.
Well, that's because it was trying to blow against something blocked and it was making everything vibrate, I'm guessing. Did the noise go away after you changed?
There was probably a half of a Ziploc bag of leaves and acorns.
Well, that doesn't... yes, I have seen that happen. Caution, if you do change your cabin air filter, first off, make sure the car is off. not running, the fan not running. Because if you have the car with the key in the on position and you go to pull the filter off, a lot of times any trash that's on the element will fall down inside the where the fan motor is, and then when you put it back together, you get this horrible noise or vibration from acorns or leaves or whatever that's falling down to the fan motor. And then you get to pull the fan motor out, clean all the leaves out of it. It's a lot of work. That's why some people prefer us to James Auto Center to do it, because we know what we're looking for. We know when we pop that cover off to take a look at it and gently pull it out, making sure we don't see any leaves or trash falling down inside there. A lot of inexperienced people don't do that. They'll pop the cover off, they'll pull it out. When they pull it off, all the leaves and stuff rake down and go into the fan blower motor down there, and now you've got a noise problem. I've actually seen that happen and had to fix one. We were doing an inspection of the car, and one of my employees pulled it out, and acorns fell down inside the car. Well, we fired the car to give it back to the customer. We told him the cabin air filter was bad. That fan motor raised all sorts of heck. I said, nope, I can't give it to the customer like that. Took it to the back, pulled the fan motor out, 3 bolts, dumped all the acorns out of it, put it back together and said, look, I'm not charging you for this, but most shops would have. But I'm telling you what's causing it is because your cabin filter is so dirty. When we inspected it, all the trash on there is falling off. It's that bad. You really need, I'm not going to go back in there and change that cabin filter unless you're prepared to possibly remove this motor again, because that's how bad it is. You refuse to let me change it. So I'm telling you right now, when you go to pull it apart, leaves and stuff are going to fall back down again, and you're going to have to repeat this process. So my advice is get it done, change it yearly. Don't wait, to 10 years down the road to do it. But cabin air filters should be changed, especially air filters, cabin filters, things that are filtering air of some sort, whether it's the air that your engine breathes or the air that you breathe, should be changed about once a year. Even if it's an air filter in a car and you look at it, so, well, that didn't look bad. You knock out some dust on it, that looks fine. You can have salt air. We live on the Gulf Coast. Salt is not, it's white. And I mean, I've had cars that have been living on the Gulf, living on Front Beach Road over there, and we'll look at their air filter and it'll be 3-4 years old and it'll look white. And I can take my flashlight and shine through it. But you take an air hose and try to blow through it, it doesn't blow very well at all. It really does, because the white salt has actually clogged the air filters up. So no matter where you live, whether you live in Bonifay, where maybe it's got dust and dirt on the roads, where your air filter turns nice and black like this cabin air filter does, or you live on the beach where maybe your air filter doesn't get quite so nasty because, well, you got beach sand out there. That's white sand. That's just white salt out there. Change your air filters yearly. Now, when it comes to other filters such as such as transmission filters really should be changed about every 30 to 40,000 miles. And I got people going, really? Well, that's if you don't want to change the transmission when you get about 150 to 200,000 miles. Fluids are much cheaper than metal parts. So, like the Mercedes. I was looking at a Mercedes yesterday and they recommended under normal service, 39,000 miles to change the transmission fluid and filter. The car had 80,000 miles on it, never had the filter changed. She took it to a shop and they said, oh, Mercedes has transmission fluid that lasts for life. Ask any Mercedes technician out there how long transmission fluid is good for in a Mercedes. They'll say the maximum, the first time, maybe 80,000 miles. He says, and that's really pushing it. Because the technicians that I know that work for Mercedes, they change it every 30 to 40,000 miles. Why is that? Because they know how expensive that transmission is to replace. They know if they change the fluid, they change the filter, they do it correctly, and they do it every 30 to 40,000 miles, they won't have to put a $7,000 transmission in their car at the end of 4 or 5 years. They won't have to do that. It's money in the bank you're saving. It's just one of the things we've learned over the years. Now, I get a lot of people that own the Mercedes and the BMWs, and they only get their oil changed once a year. I'm serious, once a year. That's because their oil counter on there says, okay, you're good for so many days or so. Well, this may be in a perfect world. That's great, but we don't live in a perfect world. We really don't. And the reality is we're seeing cars that are going 1 year between oil changes coming in with With check engine lights such as P0014, P0012, P0016, all these P00 numbers, and you go, what the heck's that mean, James? Well, it means it's anything but an electrical problem. It means it's a mechanical problem. And you go, well, aren't these solenoids actuated by electricity? Yes, they are. 12 volts actually operate them, to work. But if the oil is dirty, or the viscosity is too thick, or it's cold or whatever because the oil is dirty or whatever, it can't move like it's supposed to. So it goes, I can't move it. I'm pulling a command to move the solenoid in, and it's not moving. Well, then it sees that a couple of times. Next thing you know, you got a check engine light. You take it to a shop, and most shops, I shouldn't say most shops, a lot of shops will say, well, how long has it been since you've had your oil changed? And if the answer is, well, I changed it like the book says, it's been 6 months now. How many miles is that? Well, that's been about 6,000 miles. So you average about 1,000 miles a month, and you're going too long between oil changes. Well, my owner's manual in Mercedes says they'll change it once a year for me, or every 10 to 12,000 miles, absolutely free. Well, you do that at 100,000 miles, someone gets to put an engine in your car. I know that sounds hard to believe, but if it's not an engine, you get to put a timing chain, or you get to do something to it mechanically that you shouldn't need to do if you just change your oil more often. We see it every day. Please change your oil. Don't go more than 6,000 miles or 6 months. With full synthetic oil, if you got regular oil, that means comes out of the ground, it's not made in a test tube, even if it's a blend, I don't recommend pushing them over 3,000 to 4,000 miles. I really don't. If you saw what I saw, you would never push your car more than 3,000 to 4,000 miles with regular oil and change the filter. And if you're using full synthetic oil, you can be a little bit more forgiving. You can actually go a little longer than 6 months. But what I have found out is after about 4 to 6 months, that oil filter is restricted to the point it's not filtering anymore. That's right, it's not filtering. You say, well, how can that happen? It's an oil filter in my car. That oil's got to go through it. Nope, it actually has a spring in there, and if it gets clogged, it actually allows it to lift up and allows the oil to bypass it. That's how it works. And we see this a lot of times on cars when the oil gets dirty. They'll tick in the morning. When they go to crank it up, they'll go to tick, 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 tick. And that's two reasons. One is the oil is dirty and it's thicker. That's one reason. And the fact that the viscosity is, the oil is thicker and the viscosity has changed and the oil is dirty. Those are the two reasons on there. Once we change the oil, that's one of the symptoms we get when the oil is getting dirty. They'll get a ticking sound. When it first cranks up for maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and that's about it. And then tick, 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 and goes away. We've seen that on a lot of imported cars over the years. Mazdas, some Toyotas, mainly Mazdas do it, some Isuzus. We see that a lot. We even see it on American cars, General Motors cars, especially with the engines that go from 8 cylinders down to 4-cylinder. They'll sometimes get a ticking action, and that can let you know you're having a problem. You're not changing your oil often enough. So if you can change your oil, and you do it, don't follow that little thing that says oil life 40%, 50%, 60%. When it gets down to 40%, it's gone too far. You're normally at 5,000 to 6,000 miles. Change your oil. You don't have to believe me. You can wait till you end up having to replacing an engine if you want to. But the amount of money that you save by not changing your oil but once a year, you would be surprised. It's not that much. You may have saved $300, $400 over a 5-6 year period. But what does an engine cost? And what's your time and inconvenience of being out of car because your engine's having to be replaced or repaired, or what it's going to cost you to buy another car because it costs too much to fix your car? These are things you need to consider. Hey, this is James Morris. We'll be right back with some more tips for you. Give us a call, 850-763-0555 with your automotive question.
Part of what I'd like to let you know is what we do and how we work our system. Basically, we've got about 700 stocking dealers scattered around the 15 counties here in the Big Bend area of the state. I run a fleet of trucks, vans, and what we call hotshot vehicles to deliver to our dealers quickly so they can help service you as fast and efficiently as they can. Provide timely and efficient service, and we're there to take care of our dealers, who in turn can take care of their customers.
If you want the best deal in town for tires, you need to call Baytown Tires at 873-8900. Hanson and the guys at Baytown Tires take pride in serving Panama City for over 20 years. Baytown Tires on Highway 98 in St. Andrews. All service work backed by a nationwide warranty.
Summer is here and the days are getting longer and hotter. Call James Auto Center for a free cooling system evaluation and consultation. Give us a call, 850-763-0555 today.
Beep, 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 yeah!
Water is too powerful to fight alone. Mr. Router Plumbing. Sink, shower, and toilet emergency drain services.
All right, welcome back to our show here. We were talking about air conditioning in the first, about changing your filters and your cabin air filter and how things that it's just part of maintenance out there. That's some of the things that we have found out over the years that saves people from having to spend a lot of money. One of the places that air conditioning's leak that people don't, they'll go out there and they'll take it to a shop and they'll charge up the air conditioning and they'll look for leaks for their equipment on there. They can't find a leak. They say that we cannot find a leak. We added dye to it. You know, if it leaks, let us know. You know, we'll check it out with a light again in a week or so. If it leaks down, well, of course, they bring the car back in a week or two. It's leaked down, and there's no place. They don't see any dye leaking out. They don't see any place where the dye is leaked out from the evaporator or the condenser or the connection lines. All they have to do is take the Schrader caps off, where you put where the hoses are connected, and look underneath them. That's where the dye is, because that's what's leaking. The Schrader valves leak. Anytime you do air conditioning work on a car that's more than a year old, or really just anytime you do air conditioning work on a car, period, and you have to put gauges on there, be prepared to change the Schrader valves. Those are like the things that you put air in your tires with little Schrader valves down there. Well, air conditioning has something similar to it. It's a one-way valve. You press down, lets refrigerant go in. And you can let refrigerant out that way too if you want to, and that's exactly how the refrigerant gets out, because you've pushed it down. It's got a seal in there, a little rubber seal, and you push it down and you disturb that seal. Now, it doesn't leak a lot, but over a period of time, a molecule here and a molecule there adds up. Remember, today's air conditioning systems usually hold right at a pound, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. So it doesn't take very many molecules of refrigerant to go away before you're half charged and your air conditioning doesn't work anymore, or only works in the morning, or only works when it's cool outside. Once the temperature gets above 75, 80 degrees, it stops working. That's something that we see all the time. Schrader valves will leak, so that's a area to look. So here's what I tell people: charge the system up this is how you're supposed to charge the system up. Car comes in, you put it, first thing we do is we feel the suction hose and the discharge hose. Is it cold on one and is it hot on the other? If the answer is yes, it's warm on the other and colder on the other, we know the compressor is trying to work and we know we got a low charge. It's, especially if we can keep our hands on it where it doesn't burn it. And we say, okay, so we know we've got compressors engaging, we know it's working. Basically, everything looks like it's working like it's supposed to. So then before we even put a set of gauges on it, we see if the condenser is trying to work, see if the compressor is working. We see if it's capable, looks like it's working. In most cases, everything's working like it's supposed to. Compressor's short cycling. It's not very efficient, it's drawing down. So we'll put a set of gauges on it, see how much refrigerant, what the gauges are looking like, what's our high side reading. We want to see a high side reading of about 175 to 225 PSI sitting still. We want to see a low side between 30 to 45 PSI sitting still. We want to see it somewhere in that area. And if we don't see those things, we go, okay, we're not seeing it. Either low on refrigerant or the restriction, whatever the case may be. But if we think it's just low on refrigerant, then we suck the refrigerant out. We see how much we pulled out. If the system holds 525 grams, we want to pull 525 grams out. In most cases, when the system's more than 4 or 5 years old, we'll pull a fraction of that out because they're leaking from the Schrader valves or someplace they're leaking. So once we pull out the refrigerant in there, and we evaluate that the system we think is capable of working correctly, we pull the Schrader valves out, we measure it, we see how much oil we sucked out, how much refrigerant, then we pull the Schrader valves out and change them. Now we're pulling them out because we know once we start using them again, pushing them off and on, they're going to start leaking. So we change the Schrader valves, and that's still no guarantee they're not going to leak. I've put brand new ones on there and come back 2 weeks later and the suckers will be leaking. That's how sensitive they can be. So Schrader valves can leak very, very easily. So that's one of the biggest areas that get overlooked on air conditioning is the Schrader valves. I know no one ever talks about that, but it's there because you got your $8,000 machine attached to it, so of course it's not leaking. You put your leak detector all around it, there's no leaks because, well, the machine's on it. Take those lines off, blow the lines off to make sure you got the refrigerant out of it, wait about a minute and put your leak detector on it and watch it go nuts. Watch it going because it's leaking like a sieve. I've done them before where I had to suck it back down again and put new Schrader valves in there a second time. Just because they're new doesn't mean they work. New, N-E-W, never ever worked. Maybe that's true. But these are things you have to do. Once you charge it up, then you can take a look at your high side and low side pressure. We had a car come in yesterday. This is what we knew about the car. It didn't work very well. The air conditioning was cool, not cold. I touched the lines. The low side line was cool. The high side line was warm. It wasn't hot. Okay, well, we're low on charge, I think. So we put the gauges on there, and I said, well, what's my gauge readings? Well, my low side was 80 and my high side was 150. My guy looked at it and said, what does that mean? I said, well, what do you think it means? Well, I don't know. Well, what's the high side supposed to be? 225, 250. What is it? What's too low? It's 180. Okay. All right, so the high side's too low. What's your low side supposed to be, and what is it? Well, the low side's supposed to be around 35. Well, what is it? It's 80. So the high side is too low, and the low side is too high. Well, what could cause that? Could a compressor cause that? No. Compressor can't cause it. It compresses things, so you're compressing it. What's the only other thing that could possibly cause that? Cause the low side to be higher and the high side to be lower. Could it be something that actually causes the system to hold pressure, like an expansion valve or orifice tube? That's exactly how that works. If you got too high a low side and too low a high side, congratulations, you've got a bad expansion valve or an orifice tube that's not clogged up, that's either pushed too far down or what, it's letting it go by. Something's happened and it's not holding enough pressure in the low side to make it go through fast enough. And we see that often. I've even put brand new expansion valves on. Here's a rule of thumb. If your car is less than 10 years old, don't replace it with an aftermarket expansion valve. That pretty much goes for about anything. If your car is less than 10 years old, if if you got to replace an oxygen sensor, or you got to replace a computer, or you got to replace even an expansion valve, I really wouldn't buy those any place but from the manufacturer, from the dealership. I don't know what it is other than the fact that they have to backwards reverse engineer things. But I had a guy come by yesterday, or day before yesterday. He said, I've been doing air conditioning work for 50 years, and I'd worked on my Volkswagen, and my high side reads 150, and my low side reads 80, and I can't get it cold. I took it to the dealership, and they said, I need to change this. What do you think? Well, what do you want me to tell you, sir? He said, well, what do you think the problem is? And I said, your expansion valve's bad. I just changed it. Did you buy it from Volkswagen? No. I wouldn't go pay that $150 for it. I said, I'm going to tell you something. You got a 3-year-old Volkswagen, you better go buy that $150 expansion valve from Volkswagen, because you're not going to find one aftermarket that's going to work. If it's less than 10 years old, you're not going, if you do, it's by a grace of God. Without exception, I shouldn't say there's an exception, there's always an exception, but just about every time we put an expansion valve on a car that's less than 10 years old, we have to do it twice because the aftermarket one doesn't work. I've done them at 9 years old and they don't work. Like I said, if the car is more than 10 years old, I can get an aftermarket one and it works. The reason is because now they're selling me original equipment ones at aftermarket prices, because the prices drop because they kind of lost their, they don't have to support it anymore. The manufacturer doesn't. Once it gets 10 years old, they're not required to support that system, whether it's air conditioning, electronics, anything. They're not required by law to support it, so they don't support it. And that's what ends up happening. On expansion valves, the same thing applies. Same thing applies to oxygen sensors, same thing applies to PCV valves. They reverse engineer them when they're less than 10 years old, and they don't always work right. It's what we call NQR, not quite right. That's a good way of saying it. That car is NQR. Well, that's what happens on that Volkswagen. I asked him, he called back the other day. I said, did you put another expansion valve on it? He said, I bit the bullet, bought one from Volkswagen, put it in there, worked perfect. And I said, well, that's exactly how it works. Like I said, when a car is less than 10 years old, don't be buying aftermarket parts to put in it. Once a car gets 10 years old or older, you can get away with buying aftermarket parts. Not 100%. Don't get me. They'll still bite you, but not as bad. I don't know what it is, but I've been working on cars since I was 16 years old, and that's one of the things I have found out all throughout history, working on cars. If your car is relatively new, less than 10 years old, and you're trying to get parts for it, don't cut corners. Go to the manufacturer or the dealership and get what you need. Even if it's something, especially if it has to do with emissions, whether it's a natural leak vapor detection pump that's found in Chryslers, don't be buying those aftermarket. You end up putting 3 or 4 of those on there before you get one that works. Or oxygen sensors or PCV valves. Please, 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 if you don't want to have more problems than you started out with, not that I don't love my aftermarket parts suppliers out here. I'm just telling you what I have found out. I've been in here 38 years in one location, been working on cars pretty much all my life. And what I've seen is when you buy parts for a car that's less than 10 years old, if it's not from the manufacturer, be prepared to take it right back off again. Well, I'm not talking about light bulbs or things like that. I'm talking about things that deal with emissions or things that deal with air conditioning or transmissions. Yeah, it really makes a difference out there. It really does. And remember, today's cars, a lot of cars, you can't just put a part on there. You have to put the part on there, then take your scanner and marry the part together, making sure it's awake. Whether it's from your tire sensor to, it tells you how much air you got in your tires, to your computer knowing how rich or how lean you're running. All these things, what you're driving is a computer on 4 wheels. It's not like it used to be. You need to find a professional IT technician that can actually repair your car and keep it running. He can get the gremlins out of it. He can do a defrag, so to speak, by putting a reprogramming in your car. That's not really a defrag. That's completely wiping out what it's learned in there and redoing it. Not relearning it, but completely removing it and replacing it with a brand new brain, so to speak, just with the information in it. That's what we have to do, and we've been doing it for years successfully in the automotive repair industry. They told us, 10, 15 years ago, we're going to get it where cars can't come to you because we're going to make it where they have to come to dealerships. And we said, you can try all you want, but that's not the way it works, because customers should have the right to choose where they take their car. You shouldn't make it mandatory they go back to dealerships. And the customer says, I'm not taking my car back to the dealership after I've got out of warranty. I'm not going to be held hostage by this person. Well, that's how the free market works. Well, it worked, and we as technicians campaigned, lobbied. We got up there to Washington, D.C. We have the Right to Repair Act, where we can repair your car, and we can repair it just like the dealership can. In fact, I think we do it a little bit better because we take the time. We're not that crowded. I'm not picking on dealerships, but we take our time and we make sure you get it right, and we want to address the problem correctly. Sometimes dealerships are so busy, taking care of all the cars under warranty, they let things fall through the cracks, like their customer's been with them for the last 10 years. That's where independent shops like James Auto Center comes in. We take care of our customers. We've been taking care of you, our customers, since 1980, and we want to continue for several more years. So if you got a car question, you're going to have to wait till tomorrow, or give us a call at 763-0555, and we'll schedule you in here for a free consultation and test drive, and we'll be back tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. right here on WPGX. Summer is here and the days are getting longer and hotter. Call James Auto Center for a free cooling system evaluation and consultation. Give us a call, 850-763-0555 today.
Fix it right, guaranteed. Beep, 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 yeah!